Welcome to The Critique. Today we are reviewing a video transcript titled Psychology of People Who Don't Want Kids from the channel Beyond the Obvious.
Yeah, let's just dive right into the feedback.
The script currently risks alienating a portion of the audience by creating an unintentional hierarchy between conscious non-parents and unconscious parents.
Right. As I was reading through the notes, the argument here is that the text frames the decision to have children as just, following a script.
Yeah, like a biological inevitability, or merely an instinct.
Exactly. And conversely, it frames a decision not to have children as this profound act of awareness and comprehension and wisdom.
Which is clearly laid out in the text, and it is a compelling starting point, but I wonder if we fully consider the unintended consequence of that framing.
Yeah, the core weakness here is that it establishes a fairly rigid binary. You have parents who are portrayed as just sleepwalking through life, or perhaps even recycling pain, as the text explicitly says.
Right.
While child-free individuals are positioned as the only ones who are truly capable of breaking the cycle or achieving any kind of inner quiet.
Let's actually look closely at the section discussing the script, because the text explicitly says parents never question the script, and it suggests they rely on children to just leave something behind, whereas non-parents find meaning in depth and presence.
Yeah, and there is a huge risk that focusing solely on this contrast might overlook the audience members who are parents, or even fence-sitters, people who are actually very conscious of their choices.
Totally. The text says non-parents decide this cycle ends with me, which basically implies that parents are just perpetuating trauma.
It makes the argument feel so defensive. Perhaps even slightly superior rather than just explanatory.
Right, it implies that death and parenthood are mutually exclusive, which weakens the persuasive power of the piece for anyone who isn't already fully converted to this viewpoint.
I can see what the author is going for here, though. The goal is to validate the child-free choice, not necessarily to invalidate the parenting choice.
Right. So my suggestion is to reframe the narrative, to view both paths as different manifestations of consciousness, rather than a choice between a script and freedom.
That makes a lot of sense. Instead of framing it as conscious versus unconscious, could it be biological legacy versus communal legacy?
Precisely. For a concrete example of how to fix this, look at the current draft, where it contrasts unthinking reproduction with thoughtful silence. We should revise this to acknowledge that parenting can be conscious, but the narrator has just chosen a different, equally valid form of consciousness.
I like that a lot. So, building on that point, what if we looked at the section on intergenerational awareness?
Right, because currently it just reads as a rejection of the parent's path.
Yeah.
So let's rewrite that section. Instead of saying, non-parents decide this cycle ends with me, which, again, implies parents are just trauma conveyors, try phrasing it like this. Some heal trauma by raising the next generation different. Others heal it by dedicating their energy to resolving the trauma within themselves first.
Wow. Yeah. Do you see the difference there?
It validates both methodologies of...
That is fascinating. It turns it from a battle into a divergence of valid paths. What about the unconditional love section? Because the text suggests parents think love only counts if it's biological.
Yeah, that is a real sticking point. When discussing unconditional love, they need to avoid the implication that parents only value biological love. That feels like a straw man argument.
It really does.
They should acknowledge the validity and intensity of parental love first, then pivot to how child-free people expand that definition.
How would that look in the text?
A revision could look like this. While parental love is a profound, specific force, the child-free individual cultivates a diffuse, wide-reaching love, pouring that same nurturing energy into community, art, and essential self-compassion.
That is much stronger. It invites the listener to expand their definition of love rather than just telling them their current definition is wrong.
Moving on to our second major point. The narrative structure relies too heavily on a single emotional frequency, melancholic reverence, which causes the argument to circle repetitively rather than build to a climax.
Yeah, synthesizing the current flow, the text moves vaguely between the societal reaction to not having kids, then into psychological concepts, then into philosophical musings on silence.
And then straight back to societal judgment.
Exactly. It repeats the same imagery of stillness and noise without any distinct progression.
This is a really crucial observation. The core weakness with the pacing is that it feels less like a journey and more like a loop.
Yeah, the listener treats every paragraph as a standalone philosophical maxim. There is no narrative arc at all.
Can you give us a specific detail from the text where this happens?
Sure, I'd highlight how the text jumps from intergenerational awareness, which is a very deep internal concept, back to societal misunderstanding, specifically the whole "who will take care of you" question.
Right.
Then it goes back to inner peace, and then immediately back to societal judgment regarding deviation. It literally feels like we are constantly restarting the conversation.
And the consequence here is that because the tone is consistently soft and quiet and somewhat defensive, the listener just loses track of the central thesis. It feels like a collection of similar thoughts rather than a structured essay.
Is the connection between the external pressure and the internal peace fully established? Or is that an area to potentially bolster by separating them?
We definitely need to separate. My suggestion is to reorganize the script into 3 distinct movements, or pillars, to give the episode actual momentum and logical flow.
That sounds like a solid plan. What would those pillars look like in practice?
Let's outline a proposed structure. Pillar 1 is the external pressure. Group all the societal critiques here.
Okay.
Discuss the silence that follows the announcement, the script, and the intrusive questions like, who will take care of you? Deal with the external world first. Clear the air.
That is clearly laid out. So we handle the defense first.
Exactly. Then pillar 2 is the internal psychology. Move to the why. Group voluntary childlessness, self-differentiation, future orientation, and the intergenerational trauma arguments here.
So this becomes the science and logic section of the piece.
Yes. And finally, pillar 3 is the redefinition of legacy. This is the resolution. Discuss ikigai, nurturing ideas, and the concept of space versus emptiness. This is the philosophical.
That structure actually gives the piece a trajectory. It moves from what people say to me, to who I am, to what I leave behind.
And here is an actionable tip to make that work. Use transitional phrases that signal these shifts.
Right, to guide the listener.
Instead of just drifting, say something like, once we navigate the external questions, we have to look at the internal reality. This tells the listener we are moving from pillar 1 to pillar 2.
I wonder, though, if we've considered the tone of the psychological section. You mentioned internal psychology as pillar 2.
That leads us perfectly to our third critique. The script introduces strong psychological terminology, but dilutes its authority by immediately wrapping these terms in abstract metaphors without sufficient concrete grounding.
I am observing terms like voluntary childlessness, self-differentiation, intergenerational awareness, and future orientation. These are heavy hitters.
They are, but the weakness is that the writer implies a sort of poetic fog around these terms.
Yeah, for instance, the text introduces self-differentiation, but defines it vaguely as developing an identity not dictated by social expectations, and then it immediately jumps to freedom and depth.
It just skips the mechanics of how hard that process actually is.
And looking at the section on future orientation, the text mentions studies in behavioral psychology claiming these people think about climate and consciousness, but it doesn't cite what the studies actually measured or how that manifests in daily life.
Is there a risk that focusing solely on the poetic meaning might make the listeners sound like they are using buzzwords to justify a lifestyle?
Absolutely, rather than presenting a robust psychological argument.
So the suggestion here is to anchor the poetry with concrete reality. Define the psychological concept sharp before moving to the metaphorical application.
That makes sense. But could the evidence also support a clearer definition? How would you actually rewrite the future orientation section?
Here is a concrete example. Instead of just saying they think of raising consciousness, describe the specific trade-off. Try this. Studies suggest these individuals often channel resources into long-term community stability or career impacts that require the singular focus parenting often interrupts.
I like that.
They aren't just thinking about the vibe of the future, they are architecting the infrastructure of it.
That is much more grounded. It sounds active, not just contemplative. What about self-differentiation? Because that is a term from Bowen family systems theory, usually.
Correct, and it is a deeply painful process.
Right.
The text makes it sound like a gentle walk in the woods. Let's describe the actual friction. Here is a rewrite. Differentiation isn't just knowing the terrain. It is the painful process of disappointing your parents to stay true to yourself. It is standing in a room of family members and feeling okay being the other, knowing that your bond survives the disagreement.
That is fascinating. It adds real stakes to the term.
The general tip here is to use a concept to concrete reality to poetic meaning structure for these paragraphs. Don't skip the middle step.
I really like that. It earns the poetry. Now, speaking of earning things, we need to talk about the ending and the handling of doubt.
Yes, the script touches on the concept of regret, but dismisses it too quickly, missing an opportunity to display vulnerability and authentic strength.
The text asks, what if I regret this, but immediately answers with, regret is born from unawareness, and it implies that conscious people make peace with answers easily.
This is where I have to be constructively skeptical. The core weakness here is the too perfect resolution. The script suggests that if you are aware, you are immune to the fear of
Which feels unrealistic and slightly condescending. It glosses over the genuine painful ambiguity of such a permanent choice.
The line, regret isn't born from choice, it's born from unawareness, is a bit of a platitude. It completely ignores that people do sometimes regret conscious choices.
It makes the narrator seem untouchable, which paradoxically makes them less relatable to the audience.
Exactly. Is there a way to strengthen the argument by leaning into the difficult rather than pretending the choice eliminates?
Yes, my suggestion is we need to acknowledge that the what-if voice never truly goes away, but the trade-off is worth it.
So what if we looked at it from the perspective of trade-off? Here is a concrete revision. Instead of saying awareness kills regret, say we accept the possibility of future regret as the price of present authenticity. I would rather regret a silence I chose than resent a noise I didn't.
That is powerful. I would rather regret a silence I chose than resent a noise I didn't. That admits the possibility of regret while affirming the choice.
Exactly. And some actionable advice here. Dedicate a specific beat to acknowledging the validity of the fear of being old and alone.
Right. Don't immediately dismiss it as an insurance policy fallacy, even if that point is valid. Acknowledge the fear first. Say, it is scary to imagine aging without that guaranteed support system. That is a real fear. Then pivot to how you build community to mitigate it. This makes the narrator seem brave, not just aloof.
It creates trust. If you admit the scary parts are scary, I believe you when you say the good parts are good.
Precisely. It grounds the psychology in reality.
To wrap up, we have covered a lot of ground today. Let's recap the main actionable takeaways for the listener. First, bridge the gap. Remove the conscious non-parent versus unconscious parent binary. Frame them as equal but distinct paths to meaning. Biological legacy versus communal legacy.
Second, scaffold the structure. Move from external pressure to internal psychology to redefining legacy. This prevents the repetitive circling and gives the listener a clear map to follow.
Third, ground the science. Define psychological terms like self-differentiation and future orientation with behavioral reality. Show the pain, the trade-offs, the actions before applying the poetic metaphor.
And finally, humanize the regret. Admit the difficulty of the choice to build trust with the listener. Don't pretend awareness makes you immune to human emotion. Show how awareness helps you navigate.
We invite you to apply these structural and tonal shifts to your script. It is a beautiful piece of writing with deep potential. And with these tweaks, it will resonate not just with the choir, but with the congregation at large. Please submit the revised draft for a final polish. We would love to see how it evolves.
It really is a vital topic. There is so much depth here waiting to be fully realized. I can't wait to read the next version.
Thank you for listening to The Critique. Now get to work.